The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, folks. Hello and welcome to the Monday edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here from Right to Offend Media Studios. And joining me for our first interview of the year is Steve Stratton, friend of the show, who was actually my first guest of the year last year in 2024. And it was a great year for the show last year. So, Steve, you're my good luck token, as it were. So, thanks for joining me once again, and happy Publication Day.
Well, thank you very much. That's coming up on January 14th, and it's another exciting day, right? Any pub day is a great, launch day is a great day.
Yes, and my birthday is actually that Friday as well. So,
action-packed week. There we go.
Very action-packed week. I'll be turning 30 on Friday, so big one. So
nice.
So anyway, well, Steve, I wanted to start off asking you. I've read your first three books, the Lance Bearwolf series, and as a new fan of the series, I have to say I really like how you created Lance Bearwolf to be a Native American. He has some of that old school Native American war technique, but he's also a special forces modern military man as well. So I'm just curious. I'm not sure if you've explained this in the books or on your website, but how did you come up with Lance Bearwolf as a character, and what inspired him?
Yeah, so I started writing the very first book, Shadow Tier, in 2019, like in the break between, Thanksgiving and New Year's, when I was a federal contractor at the time. And so government really is shutting down. And so lots of extra time to write. But I didn't have a primary character in mind at the time. And I started looking around at all these people I admired. Of course, Mark Greaney and, Brad Taylor, Andrews and Wilson, Stephen Conley. And so lots of great characters. But I was thinking maybe I want somebody different. I was influenced by Frank Herbert in my early career, or my early readings, like of Dune and everything Dune, but also some different people who, I navigated towards stories about martial artists, ninja, things like this. And so I wanted some of that different kind of thinking. I wanted somebody who could be in the real world, so to speak, not stuck in a matrix, in the real world, but also have some of that older school teaching and mentality. So, some of my friends joke that I'm a boomer nerd that likes new age, likes stuff going on today. So I sort of cross over. And so it just dawned on me that, hey, I don't see anybody writing from a Native American perspective. Not that I'm trying to steep people into all the origins of the Crow tribe or that kind of thing.
Right.
But Louis L'Amour did that one book called Last of Breed about the Air Force pilot Native American who was shot down over Siberia and had to work his way back to freedom. And that was really impressive and made a great impression. So that's where I came up with Lance. It wasn't until the third book is that novella where I really dive into who Lance is, A Warrior's Path. And in this fourth book here, we have a lot of fun. I wanted to stay in one country, not 6. Because the previous book, you remember, Shadow Sanction, I was in like the Crow Reservation. We were in Afghanistan, Marseille, France, New York. And I thought, okay, I've done the Rainbow Six kind of thing with all over the world. Maybe I should focus on just one spot. So I picked Cuba because I just wanted to, I needed a warm spot to relate to at the time.
Yeah. Props to you. You did do the Rainbow Six thing, but you also did it like in a half the page length of Clancy. Oh
my goodness. Before writing the book, I re-listened to Rainbow Six and I wasn't paying attention. One day I opened it up to listen to it some more and I realized I still had 30 hours to go.
Yeah.
It's like a 35, 40-hour audiobook, much less, how I've got it over my shoulder somewhere. It's back on the other side there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Rainbow Six because I'm actually listening to Without Remorse, which is that's the first, kind of Rainbow Six book, if you want to, put it in that series. And I started that, I think, back in October. And I'm still like, I'm just now making it to the halfway point, and in the meantime, I'm sitting here like thinking like, how do people read or listen to all the George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones novels when those are like equal in length, and there are 6 of them. I'm starting to understand why he hasn't published anything in 15 years. So
yeah, it's interesting. Just in the short time that I've been writing, and really, I started in 2019, but I was just writing. I didn't know what I was writing at the time. But in the 4 years or the 5 years since 2020, and people, agents and publishers and people, it's like we've gone from the 120. It's okay to go to 150K words if you're Mark Greaney or you're a name person, or Patterson or somebody like that. But the books keep getting smaller, right? A couple of years ago, it was 100K, then it was 90. Now people are looking for 80K books just so that people can buy and move on instead of making a commitment.
Well, and the other thing too, I think as well, with audiobooks becoming so, prevalent too, it's a lot less. I don't want to say it's less work for audiobook narrators, but certainly as far as like length goes, it certainly helps them. And by the way, so I read the first book in your series, Shadow Sanction, but I actually listened to David Temple's one for the second one, and he did a fantastic job.
He was so gracious. He did a little bit of that sound editing and added some things in, which I thought was really cool. And got me all set up. I had no idea about audiobooks and all the figures. You can do things nice and easily for a lot of the platforms, but when it comes to Audible, they've got all these restrictions on, bandwidth and clipping and blah, blah, blah.
I have a guy who narrates my novella series, and he does all that, and then I just, it's a royalty split deal for my books, which is, some narrators, they like you to pay up front, but others, they want a royalty share. So I find that's, I wish all audiobook narrators were straightforward, but it's definitely, it's a process for sure.
Yeah, but if they're good enough to, if they've got a great voice, They do a great job for you, and then they can do the engineering to put it all together, right? That's really nice to have somebody who can give you the complete package and you upload the file like I did maybe through Findaway Voices or whoever,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, Audible, even for like, because a lot of people don't know this, but this podcast also gets, distributed for Audible, and iTunes and Spotify, pretty much all do the same thing. But like for Amazon, there's like extra stuff that you have to do for, even podcasts. It's a little odd, but anyway, so speaking of novellas, you've written 3 novels, but then you also wrote the novella. And what's funny is I actually talked to Terrence McCauley around the time he did his novella with Silverback Novellas. How did you get involved in that group, and what was it like for you writing a novella as opposed to a full-length novel?
Well, I got involved with Silverback through my association with James Apton and Best Thrillers Design. I forget.
Best Thriller Books.
Best Thriller Books, yes. And then he has a company where he does a lot of social media and stuff like that. And so, so I was involved with him there, and he offered me a chance to invest in the company, which was fun. It was interesting having Terrence do the first one because actually, having been in the Secret Service, I had pretty good idea of what went on, what didn't go on in Chicago, and then what actually went on for 10 additional trips leading up to Dallas and in 1963. And I've actually written a short story about Dallas and about how the Secret Service was in this rut of doing the same thing over and over and over. Bringing the president in, flying him in, motorcading all over the place, at great risk with the open top limousine and things like that. And so I wrote a story, a very different kind of story about Dallas, but being involved with Terrence, and then also knowing Chris Albanese, who's, much more recently retired, so to speak. He's still working, but retired from the Secret Service.
Right.
It was a fun thing to see him put together that story and then talk about the realities of what happens on the ground when there's an actual presidential movement and things like that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I know a lot of people who work in Washington in politics, but my friends always joke with me that I'm the guy who knows all the Secret Service agents because I know you, I know I know CE a little bit, I know John Guarnieri, and I met Dan Bongino a long time ago. Those are all Secret Service people from across different administrations, and so it's always interesting hearing everyone's perspective on the Secret Service and really the presidency from that point of view too.
Yeah it's a definitely an interesting perspective on what's going on in Washington when you're right up next to it. Not technically in it, but right up next to it all day long kind of things.
Have you ever considered like writing a story around the Secret Service, or has Eric Bishop cornered that territory with the Body Man?
Yeah, it's funny. Eric does a great job for somebody who's not, he went to the FBI Academy, but and he certainly knows to talk to people, do his research and things like that. Yeah, I actually have written now 4 short stories that I'm thinking about adding 4 more to do an anthology, but they're all Secret Service related. And I'll say that because my series is called The Order of the Red Coral. Red coral back in medieval days was used to ward off assassins. People would wear red coral.
Right.
To ward off assassins. So that's the underlayment of an international organization that actually helps push and get the Secret Service started up into protection and presidential protection.
Interesting.
I've got a story. I've got a story way back in 1700s in Portugal. That's sort of the origin story. And right now, then my next story is Dallas in November of '63, Florida in May when the Queen comes to knight Schwarzkopf after the Gulf War, and then 2 years later when ex-President Bush former President Bush was supposed to go to Kuwait to celebrate the beating up on Iraq and things like that. But there are actual Secret Service stories in there, protective kind of scenarios. Even in 1700s, I've got a group of guys that are trying to protect the King of Portugal.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the Secret Service, they didn't start, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't actually start protecting the president until Kennedy, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a bit before that. But when it was funny when the Secret Service when Treasury said, "Okay, Secret Service, you need to start protecting the president," they assigned 2 agents to the White House, and
Right.
I forget the date, but it was quite a while ago. And then eventually, over time, one of the presidents, was there a presidential? I forget if it was an assassination attempt, but then it started to ramp up, and of course, then by the Eisenhower administration, it was a full up unit and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because, Dallas, we just had the anniversary of that at the end of last year. And then also, with this past year, we had, not one, but 2, assassination attempts against, President Trump. And I know that he's certainly a controversial figure, but I don't think any elected official should be targeted. What is your perspective? Because you were there when Reagan, when Hinckley tried to assassinate
Well,
him.
I had just left. So I was there. I got to White House when I was a communicator for the Army, right as before Nixon resigned. So I was there for Ford and Carter mostly. And then I left just before President Reagan was shot.
Wow.
But I'd gone in and out of that door at the hotel there many a time, that same exact door. Being low guy on the totem pole as far as rank seniority, that kind of thing. My harping that we're committing the cardinal sin of doing the same thing over and over and over and over. That it was easy for somebody even mentally deranged Hinckley to know where to be, where to stand, to get a good shot off, right? So, or shots off. And in reality, that is exactly the same kind of mentality that put President Kennedy in harm's way. The story that Terrence wrote was an actual visit that didn't happen, but the advance team went out. And that's why I say, if you research that time in history, there's about 10 trips during the late summer into the fall where Kennedy was going out and trying to reunite America and doing the same. The advance teams were doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And so, was that a factor? I believe so. It just was made for, even back in those days, it made for easy understanding of what the movement profile might look like and other things. So even if they're keeping it, close hold, things like that. So yeah, I've written these 4 stories. I've got the next one I'm thinking about doing there was an attempt on Golda Meir by Black September in New York City back in the 70s, I think it was. So yeah, I'm thinking of and starting to play around with like 5,000 to 6,000 word short stories is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did a crime fiction anthology myself at the end of last year, and yeah, I for one, I try and write every day. I have larger like novella and novel projects, but I also like writing short stories just because there's something about, I guess, you can you can spend a month or more on just one chapter of a novel. And even though you're getting stuff done, it doesn't always feel like you're getting stuff done because you're rewriting. But like I find with short stories, that you still have to put effort into them, but they're not as intensive and tedious for
What
those, I find.
surprised me, Sam, what surprised me about the short story process is I completely forgot. It's short, right? You got a start and you got an ending, and you put a little action in between. That one of the short stories I was writing, I got stuck in the middle. And I'm
Yeah.
like, God dang it. There's a middle in a short story too. It might only be 1,000 words long, but there's still a middle. And so, yeah, I had to like set it down and do something else. And at any one time, I'll have three different things going on, just because
Yeah.
it helps me. I can transition, but it also helps me with new ideas, new thoughts, take a break, look at something differently when I come back to it.
Yeah, and then I mean, in the case of the Lance Bearwolf novella you wrote, I did you write that as its own separate story, or did you write that with the intention of, hey, this is going to tie in to stuff in other books?
I wanted it to tie in. So people have been asking to learn more about Lance, how he started, where he came from, all that kind of stuff. So I wrote that with that in
Yeah.
mind. But I got so excited about writing that story, I was like almost at 50,000 words before I thought maybe I should stop and back up, because this is supposed to be a novella, not another novel. And so yeah, I was able to tie it into, as you saw, into book one, I think pretty well. Hopefully it didn't get too tedious in the middle where Lance was going through training and learning about himself and things like that. But yeah, that was fun. It was something to do because I was like trying to figure out what to do for the fourth book, which Caribbean Harvest, coming out on January 14th, is that what I call the fourth book. It's the fourth book in the series. In the novella, which was the third book I wrote, should actually be read that first if you're going to
Yeah.
jump into the series, and then you can then following the series works a little better. So
Yeah, but I mean, that's why the term prequel also, exists. Like, I even went back and fleshed out some details of my main character, John Ryder's story, because I don't know about you, but like, for me personally, I started out writing the character, in one way, and then as I fleshed out more and more, you kind of, I guess in my case, you learn more about the character that you create yourself, and new ideas come to you, as things um, evolve.
100%. I knew Lance Bearwolf so much better after doing two books that I was able to go back and then tie it in and bring stuff that I'd hinted at or
Yeah,
mentioned here and there forward. So bring it forward in more depth. Didn't detract from the other books, but adds value to it because yeah, I mean, my first character profile for Lance Bearwolf was like 2 pages long, very basic.
yeah,
And now I've got a character profile that's like 5 pages long, 200 questions. What would Lance do? This, that, the other thing. Did the same for Ellie Parker, his now wife, and some other folks. So I've never writers and teachers talk about building that Bible, right? The series Bible. And I've never done that. I've done the part about the characters, so I get to know the characters well, and I can be consistent in writing those characters. I haven't done the rest of the Bible. I still have to go back and look up, what did I say here? Didn't I mention this here?
yeah.
That kind of stuff.
I mean, there are entire softwares for that, like Scrivener. I've used Scrivener before, but like honestly, I kind of keep like a running notes page on my iPhone, and that works just as good as
Yeah.
anything for character Bible. The other thing that's weird with some of those character Bible is some authors say that like you should have that ready to go right when you start writing, and I'm kind of like, well, when you first start writing, especially, if you're a first time author like we all once were, you don't necessarily know how, if the book is going to be successful, if there's any interest, or if you're even going to want to continue to write, after that first book. So,
Yeah,
having,
is that investment worth your time, or should you be learning the craft, right?
right.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. It I did that 2-page character thing just to keep people straight, but I was doing that in my second and third edit kind of thing,
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that right off the bat. But yeah, the novella was a lot of fun. The short stories have been a lot of fun. They were a great break, and yeah, I've got all kinds of options before me about another short story, maybe a Lance short story, story for Ellie herself, and then the book after this one, which would be the main, like the fifth or potentially sixth Shadow Tier book, would be the president tells Lance he needs to stop the poisoning of America, stop the fentanyl. So that'd be next on the list.
Yeah, so that's the other interesting thing is the books don't necessarily match up concurrent to our current time. I know that the first one takes place in like in the 90s, and then I
Late 90s.
believe, yeah, and then your second book takes place in the early 2000s. So are you eventually going to bring Lance into the present timeline, so to speak, or
Yeah. I'm working in 4 to 6 year chunks to get him up to speed. So,
yeah,
it's funny you mentioned that because writing a book set in 1998, it was when I was still operating as a Green Beret and stuff, and down in South America. And even then, even with that experience, I had to go back and make sure that, like, I didn't slip a brand new SIG pistol in there that didn't exist back then, stuff
yeah.
like that. So yeah, getting up to present day I think is a good idea.
What so in regards to your career as a Green Beret, how much has that influenced the character of Lance as well as far as fighting the drug war? I would imagine quite a lot. Obviously last time you were here you shared the story about how your mother was a victim of the cartels, and my condolences to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely been there's I have great respect for people who are able to pass selection and become part of a team. If you go on to bigger and better things, whether it's working with the intel community or end up in Delta, CAG, some other, special task force, good on you. But there's a mindset, of being able to listen very well and tell stories so that you can get things done, right? The idea for Green Berets is to work through a partner country
Right.
to help get things done or to stabilize the region or whatever. And in special forces, an E5 weapons sergeant would, in a certain scenario, be responsible for 250, men and women fighters, like in a guerrilla kind of organization, things like that. So there's a lot of maturity, but also that ability to adapt and fit into a culture and things like that. And so that does inform how I write Lance. Morgan is on the other hand is a bit more of a freewheeling, rules are for somebody else kind of guy.
Yeah, he's the
Lance
maverick.
Lance doesn't mind banging up against the guardrail, sort of like, or taking somebody out in hockey kind of thing to score a goal. But yeah, so it that has informed my experience, makes it easier for me to build on Lance. I've got a new series that will come out in the fall with Winding Road Stories called Codename Snowman, and that's completely different. I don't have as I built that story out, I had nothing to go on from a personal experience standpoint. And so I had to investigate, research, talk to people. I mean, it still says